Welcome back. Doubles in here, so we're not going to belabor Oriole baseball more than we should. We are a sports network around here and have been for 2 decades, and we're still waiting for the Orioles to win, and it's going to be a little while. And I haven't talked Orioles with Luke Jones in a couple of weeks. We've sort of let this thing simmer a little bit as I went away to Yellowstone and the Ravens came onto the grid, and obviously with the tragedy down in Maryland and all of the fold out of that, we'll have plenty of that to discuss as we get ready for college football as well. But Luke, it's almost like baseball season's over here, and it's like it almost never started to some degree. And as we get up on the end of August, I went away for a couple days. I'm out on the West Coast. I'm checking the score to see that they're losing every day, not that it matters. I think part of it is sort of the staggering nature of the GB, you know, like the game's back at 50 and a half and 51 and a half. You look up and you say, all right, I've never seen this before. So your neck kind of cranes to say, well, can they lose 100 before the Red Sox win 100? There's all this weird stuff. 1988 comes up every day. But on a day-to-day basis, there's not a whole lot of reason to watch unless you're really, really invested in this. And I don't know many who are anymore, although I spent Sunday invested in Cedric Mullins and trying to figure out who these guys are. And it just looks like a bunch of minor league players trying to play against like a team that could win the World Series in the Indians, and that's probably not going to go well most days in baseball.
Well, sure. I mean, if you're looking strictly on a daily basis to see if they're going to win or lose, I mean, they're 50 games under 500. I mean, I don't know what to really tell you. And that was...
How many times have you said that in your life? They're 50 games under 500.
Not very often.
Right,
My
exactly.
goodness, you're talking about the 88 Orioles.
I said to my wife, it's like looking up and saying, that guy's hitting 470 in September.
Yeah.
Well, that's never happened. Well, no, but he's doing it. And that's kind of the weirdness of the numbers for me. You get my head around it. And to think that the Royals are this bad, too, that adds, sort of the cherry on top, I think, right?
It's true, but it's funny. After Friday's game, I kind of, or I guess I did it at the end of the last homestand, middle of last week. I kind of looked at where the Orioles were in relation to the 62 Mets, in relation to the 2003 Tigers, and to think that the Orioles, as terrible as they've been, only have 3 fewer wins than the Mets had for that whole season. And, I mean, you just kind of go down the list, only have a few more, have a few wins less than the Tigers did in 2003. And it's astonishing to think that as poor, as terrible, as historically bad as the Orioles have been in relation to the franchise history, they're still well off the pace, and they're not going to be the 62 Mets. They're not going to be the 2003 Tigers. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to be among the 8 or 9 worst teams in the history of modern baseball. I mean, that's just where they are right now. They'll
be the most expensive, awful team in history.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, they've shed a lot of payroll. They've traded a lot of guys that were good players at least at one point in time. And, certainly you can debate, where Brad Brock is now, where Zach Britton is now. Jonathan Scope's been terrible with Milwaukee. But, we know what kind of player he's capable of.
Well, he wasn't very good here this year.
Well, sure. And that's, that's one of the, 25 different reasons why this team was so terrible before they officially broke it all up in January or in July, sure. But you kind of just go down the list and say, okay, they're 50 below 500. They're currently on a pace to go roughly 48 and 114. I have no interest in whether they win or lose at this point. I could care less if they manage to win 50 games rather than 48 games if, in the process, Cedric Mullins doesn't look any good and Trey Mancini has a second half that's in line with the first. My point is, I'm looking at individuals at this point. We're in nugget evaluation mode, to borrow a term that was used at the beginning of the Buck Showalter era. You're looking for guys to show you something, and you mentioned Cedric Mullins. He's kind of at the top of the list right now in terms of interest. And while I have some questions as far as his throwing arm in center field, that's kind of the one clear weakness for him, as he doesn't have a especially strong throwing arm. Everything else about him, I've liked what I've seen. Now, we're talking about 9 or 10 games, very clearly, so you don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, but he's hit really well, and he's shown some plate discipline, and he's drawn some walks, and he's had some bunt singles, and he already has 6 extra base hits in his first 9 games. Those are things you want to see, and I'm way more interested in seeing that than if Jeffrey Ramirez can somehow pitch well enough to give the Orioles a chance to win a game. I mean, I'm just, as far as guys that are on this roster that have no future with this team, there are more of those guys than the guys that you say maybe, or the guys that you think have a future on this team. So it's such an individualized interest at this point. I don't care if they win on a given night anymore. Sure, if they win, is it fun? And do people manage to go to the ballpark that night? Do they have a decent experience? Yeah, and I'm not saying there's no value to that, but I'm much more interested in seeing how Cedric Mullins does, how Trey Mancini does, who, by the way, has hit pretty well since the All-Star break and has looked more like the Trey Mancini from last year. So that's been good to see. And I want to see more guys in the bullpen look like Paul Fry, who has actually been pretty good. There's also been some new bullpen arms who have been terrible. So you're weeding out who is going to potentially have a future and who are just going to be guys that have a very short, brief time here in Baltimore. And that's going to be a process that continues for the next couple of years. So what the record is right now, is it embarrassing? Of course. Is it something where you want to try to avoid losing as many games as you can? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure how much better losing 108 games is rather than losing 114 in the grand scheme of things.
But I don't know what's to watch in September for most people, right?
Yeah,
so, most people aren't watching this. I'm wondering how much we should actually talk about it. I'm not watching a lot of it, although I did tune in on Sunday, and it just feels to me like they're trying out minor league pitching to see if some Mike Wright can fall out of a tree or somehow they can discover some Miguel Gonzalez, on the come. And maybe get 28 starts out of one of these guys next year and have them pitch to a 4.5 ERA while they only lose 97 next year, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is right now. I mean, if you truly cared about winning as many games as you can the rest of the season, you don't trade Manny Machado. And we know, obviously, that would have been lunacy not to trade Manny Machado. So it's very clear your expectations, your purpose changes. Now, not to say you don't want whatever lineup and whatever starting rotation and whatever bullpen you have on a given night, you don't want them to put their best foot forward and try to perform well, sure. But you're also realistic enough to know that when you're sending some of the individuals out there that the Orioles have been sending out there on a nightly basis with guys that, at this point, even someone like me who covers the team could have a devil of a time naming the 25-man roster on a given night.
Oh, man, my wife and I were sitting there watching, who's that guy, and where'd this guy come from? And, the best part is in the old days, they wouldn't be in the media guide, right? I mean,
right.
When I covered the Orioles in the 90s, like when they brought up Jack Voigt or whomever, at the end, they were at least, you could open the media guide and find these guys and say, oh, I know who Paul Carey is. There, he's right.
Right.
And now, at least with the internet, they have 15 guys. I at least look up Jeffrey and find out that it's pronounced Jeffrey, even though it says Jeffrey. Although I like saying Jeffrey. It's more fun. It's kind of like saying Nestor for the 2 weeks that I did back in April as well. But it's a tryout. It's fake football. It's fake baseball. I don't know what else to say. And part of this is the drama of Adam Jones that continues to play out behind these 110 or 112 losses, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, about the only interest that there's going to be beyond the point that I've made was where you're looking at individuals. There was some excitement when Cedric Mullins was called up and played that first weekend at Camden Yards, and in turn you saw Adam Jones play right field for the first time since he was a Seattle Mariner. So beyond that individualized interest, that that isolated interest that you have in a handful of players, about the only drama left is, where exactly is this team going to fall from a historical context? Are they going to be the 5th worst team in the history of baseball? Are they going to be the 7th worst team in the history of baseball? At this point, they'd have to have a heck of a finish even to beat out the 88 Orioles. I mean, they're several games behind the 88 Orioles in terms of pace. So will there be some semblance of interest in that come the 3rd week of September? From an infamy standpoint, yeah, I guess so.
I'm more interested in going to Bowie next weekend with you and just sort of hanging out and seeing a game, and having some cheap beer and a dog, literally.
Yeah, I mean and I think you're seeing, and I can say just from my Twitter universe, people that I follow that are baseball fans and Orioles fans, I've seen more people saying, "Hey, let's go check out."
I saw
Bowie.
the Aberdeen Ironbirds, by the way, are having a 1983 World Series reunion.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, at this point, I mean, that's one thing I would actually encourage people to go see some of the Orioles minor league.
I've never not encouraged going to minor league games. I'm just not the guy who does that on a Thursday night to drive to Frederick. But I could definitely over the next 2 years see me doing one trip to Bowie, one trip to Frederick, one trip to Delmarva, seeing a game on the way down to the beach or something, just because I like baseball, and I'm not giving these creeps my money right now. If I get my press pass back in April, I'll go to games next year. If I don't, I'll go to Bowie or I'll go to Fred. I mean, there's nothing that leads me there, and I watch it on TV, and it does okay for me, but I am kind of interested in these young guys and what they could be. And I am going to wind up at Bowie before this season is over because I haven't been to the ballpark, other than the All-Star game really since opening day.
Yeah, and I mean, when you start talking about this, and you made the point, it is very much like preseason football. I mean, how much does it mean? I mean, it's glorified spring training at this point. I mean, it really is. Except you are seeing veteran players continue to play. And
well, what's amazing? It changes how you watch the game, right? Like, so Sunday I'm watching the game, and Jeffrey Ramirez covers first base on a grounder to Davis to start the fourth inning in a 1-0 ball game. To me, it was very clear that if they would have gone to review, he was out. Yeah. And Buck, and my wife's like, well, why aren't they reviewing? I'm like, they're 51 games out of first place. Maybe Buck just wants to see this kid pitch in a jam because guys like Ponson and Cabrera and all of these clods would always fall apart on a play like that where they don't get a call. And they would come back to the mound, and they huff and they puff, and the next thing you know, it's ball one and ball two. And my wife's like, dude, you've watched a lot of baseball, because 15 minutes later was 8-0, and they're on their second minor league pitcher. And I said to her, see, that's why Buck didn't go get the pitcher, because he wanted to see the pitcher sort of struggle a little bit, see what this kid's made of. And the kid was made of 3.1 innings and 7 hits and 8 runs and bringing in the bullpen, and the bullpen's an arsonist, and that's what this is going to be a lot of the time over the next 3 years until they figure it out. And they're not going to throw money at it. They're going to throw youth at it. They're going to throw patience at it. But I don't know that people are going to watch it. I really don't. I don't know that people are as engaged in baseball as they were in 2001 and 2 and 3 and 4 the first time we went through this garbage.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because of the point you just made, you even said yourself you prefer watching it on TV. I mean, I think that's where a lot of people are with sports across the board, more so than in 2001. So, I mean, that part of it, sure, they're going to have to work extremely hard to try to engage their fan base, and that's where, Vitalin coming in, that's going to be a major challenge for him. I mean, there's no question about that. That's going to be a major challenge for John and Lou Angelos, because they are coming off the heels of what's going to be a historically terrible franchise infamous record-setting kind of a season, knowing that you're not going to be able to market Manny Machado or Jonathan Scope or, most likely Adam Jones, unless he does decide to re-sign with the Orioles, or if the Orioles even want him back. I think there's still plenty of question there. But, the long story short is you're not going to have much in terms of on-field play that's going to draw people. So you need more giveaways, you need more ticket deals, you need more
Kevin Gausman flying, whatever the hell that thing was.
Yeah, I mean, I said this to you probably starting 2 months ago when it was clear that this team wasn't just going to, it wasn't just a case that they weren't going to be in the race, it was going to be historically poor, that you need to market this team like a minor league baseball team. You go to a minor league game and there's basically a DJ doing something between every half inning, whether it's a giveaway, whether it's kids on the field, on the side of the field doing a little contest, whatever. I mean, they're going to have to do those types of things as much as possible to try to get people to come. But getting beyond that, to the point that you made about Jeffrey Ramirez, which I don't want to pick on him too much. He's one example of many guys that they're trying to find out.
He wouldn't be pitching in the big leagues with any other organization, maybe outside of Kansas City.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well, I mean, you could say that about a number of guys, right?
Well, right, but what do you expect when you put people in? I put people in over their head on the radio. It didn't go so well. No one wanted to listen to it. No one wants to watch Poor, and no one wants to watch David and Goliath on a daily basis. And that's what it is when you're playing the Cleveland Indians. I mean, look, they got Kansas City next weekend. Maybe they'll have a chance, but even the Oaklands, and last week of the year, they're going to see New York, Boston, and Houston's going to need to win all those games at the end the way Oakland's playing. So they're going to lose a lot of baseball games in September because they're going to walk on the field and just be overmatched.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that whatsoever. I mean, they're overmatched against just about everyone at this point. I mean,
fair enough.
The 50 games below 500, that's kind of the no-duh statement. But in the meantime, you want to see Cedric Mullins continue to flash the signs that he's flashed at this point. I like what I've seen out of him so far. Again, very small sample, and he's got to show once the league starts to see him more and starts to adjust, he needs to adjust. And there's that chess match that's always ongoing. I mean, ask Trey Mancini about that, who was pretty miserable in the first half of the season overall, but he's hit much better since the All-Star break and has looked like the Mancini from a year ago. Even he's not a young guy, but Alex Cobb, as terrible as he was the first 3 months of the season, and I know many people aren't watching on a nightly basis, Alex Cobb's been damn good since the beginning of July and has looked like the Alex Cobb of Tampa Bay. Now, what does that mean for the Orioles for the next year or two? Maybe it means a year from now they might be able to move him. I don't know. Or maybe it means that they have a nice, solid veteran at the top of their rotation to kind of anchor you and mentor some young guys. And there is some value to that, too. There is some value to having a few veterans around here and there. You can't be completely made of young players, but there are going to be a heck of a lot of growing pains, and they've already had that, and they're going to continue to have that, to your point, not just this season, but 2019 and 2020. And you hope at the end of 2020 or the second half of 2020, maybe they're starting to trend in the right direction. But they're going to lose a lot of baseball games between now and then. But I'll say this much. I'd much rather lose a lot of baseball games with young players who might have a chance to be a part of your next winning team here in Baltimore, compared to filling in the gaps with veterans and spending moderate amounts of money on veteran players to try to win 78 games. I kind of felt like that was their formula far too often in the 98 to 2011 period. And what did it get you? I mean, I'd much rather look terrible with young guys, giving them an opportunity to see if they can sink or swim, rather than being less terrible but doing it with a bunch of guys who have no future with you. So that's kind of where they are right now, and they're not going to be particularly interesting, at least until more of the likes of Ryan Mountcastle and Austin Hayes and Yusniel Diaz and DL Hall, and go down the list of any of their top 15 to 20 prospects. Once you start seeing more of those guys, I think there'll be some more eyeballs on the product. But I'll remind everyone, Adam Jones played for some really lousy teams early in his career. Matt Wieters played for some lousy teams early in his career. Nick Markakis, go down the list. Even some of those guys that ended up being part of playoff clubs, they lost for a while. So that's kind of what you have to keep in the back of your head. As much as we're ready to write off someone who looks really bad right now or anything like that, you kind of just have to keep throwing them out there. And to your point on Sunday with Ramirez, you wanted to see how he responded. And Buck right now with the bullpens especially, and whether it's Buck this year or some other manager next year, they're going to be throwing a lot of relievers out there who, frankly, aren't going to have any business pitching in some of the spots that they're pitching in. But just the reality of where you're dealing in, at the end of the day, when all the dust settles and you've weeded out the have-nots, you're hoping that you have a few guys who have the right stuff, and then you're starting to build a bullpen that's trending in the right direction then.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. And if you're not watching the Orioles, well, we are some of the time, most of the time, at least on the Cedric Mullins watch. I mean, I would say that for them, Luke, at least having a player that makes you kind of want to put the TV on, or a pitcher that might want to make you put the TV on. They don't have a lot of that going on, but maybe they can create that by April or May, right?
Yeah, and I think that there are some other guys. I mean, people have talked about DJ Stewart. He's a AAA. His numbers have been okay. I mean, he's going to get an opportunity at some point here in the near future. Do I think he's going to be a long-term answer? The jury's out, and the jury's out on so many of these guys. I mean, even a guy like Trey Mancini, who's hit much better the last month, made you cast some doubt on how real last year was. I'm not ready to write him off, but I have questions. So kind of going down the list, and Mullins at least provides that kind of a fresh feeling, taking a look at him, and he's played well early on. That certainly helps rather than a young guy getting caught up and going 4 for his first 40, and then right off the bat you're wondering if he's lost all confidence. He's played well. He's hit well, and you certainly have seen enough from him that you want to see more from him. So you kind of go down the list and you identify those guys. Another guy that I'm really going to be watching the rest of this season is Dylan Bundy, who has been pretty terrible since the start of July when he turned his ankle in Atlanta, had that good start, and went on the DL. He hasn't been the same since coming back. So I want to see Dylan Bundy get back to looking like the guy he was earlier this season. A guy who maybe wasn't an ace, but was at least a top half of the rotation guy. Dylan Bundy, since the beginning of July, has an ERA over 8. So he's someone that isn't a new player, but you certainly want to see him get back to pitching like he's capable of pitching. Not so much that it helps the Orioles right now, but he could be the guy that you trade a year from now potentially and get you maybe a nice return for someone who has some years of club control. But you want to see him get back on track. So it's such an individualized, specific list for me right now watching the Orioles as far as I don't really care whether they win or lose on a given night, but I do care about seeing Cedric Mullins and seeing Trey Mancini and hoping that Chance Sisco gets back up in Baltimore at some point and starts playing well. I mean, that's kind of an understated disappointment, how disappointing he's been this year. But you just go down the list and you identify those guys that are interesting, and you hope that one or two of those guys that you have no idea about, to your point a few minutes earlier in the segment, maybe someone becomes the next Miguel Gonzalez. Maybe someone becomes the next Richard Blyer, and you find someone else that can help you in the future.
Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net finds Luke Jones, who's mainly doing football these days, but there is some baseball out there. We'll get to some Terps conversation as well as we burn up these final preseason games over the next week or week and a half. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world you happen to be. Also, our morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Also brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club. They're getting ready for the Maryland Million on October the 20th, as well as some Timonium dates. But they're down at Laurel with the fantastic sports book down there, air-conditioned. It's first class. Great crab cakes, great drinks. Brand new decor. Get down to Laurel and check out what they've done down there with the Maryland Jockey Club and Laurel Park. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. You get it first. Sign up. Almost 10,000 of you on it each and every day. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home. Big shout out to our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Chicken Palooza underway through the 31st. Make sure you're checking that out. I got to get my Chicken Palooza shirt. I'm going to have that on my Facebook Live as well as my YouTube WNSTV channel soon. Make sure you're using the ROFO Rewards card as well as the app when you're doing your gas. You get your fried chicken and your Western fries free, as well as coffee. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.